Mountain stream, every sunset sky, but my one request, Lord, my only aim, is that you reign in me again. Lord, reign in me, reign in your power over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again, over every thought, over every word. May my life reflect the beauty of my Lord, 'cause you mean more to me than any earthly thing. So won't you reign in me again, Lord, reign in me, reign in your power over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again, Lord, reign in me, reign in your power over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am.
This morning, many of you have heard the word insanity before. And so many times it's used in different contexts. Maybe you're one of these people that have heard the word insanity before, and it's a workout regimen. A workout that you do to be able to work out. It's kind of a plyometric kind of thing, cardiovascular kind of thing. And so that's what insanity is to some. But to some, insanity is just the thought of exercise in general. I don't know if that's where you are. Maybe to you, insanity might be driving by while this light is on. It's coming, I promise. Now I'm going to tell y'all, as I get older, I didn't say old, I said older. I try to watch a little more about what I eat, but I'm going to tell you, if I ever drive by and this sign's on, and I keep driving, I really feel like I've done something morally wrong. So much so that I'll call somebody and I'll say, hey, guess what I just did? Now, I don't know if I'm calling for justification of, okay, you did a good job, good willpower. Or I just want to hear the person on the other side go, dude, what were you thinking? You know, so that's kind of insanity. Many people have attributed Albert Einstein for this phrase. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. However, as smart a guy as he is, he didn't actually say that. He didn't coin that phrase. You research it a little bit. It comes from, not that a book I've read, comes from a book published in 1983 by Rita Mae Brown entitled Sudden Death, and you see the phrase in that book. So somebody thought, hey, that's pretty cool, and they started using it. So when we look this morning, that is actually kind of the definition. I like the definition. I like the phrases that it has there. But if you look in your dictionary, the actual definition you find there looks something like this. In its proper context, it refers to a state of being seriously mentally ill, or, the one we're going to focus more on this morning, extreme foolishness or irrationality. You see, that's what sin is. It is our extreme foolishness and irrationality taking place. You see, we know that the wages of sin is death. Romans 6 and verse 23 tells us that. And if we stop and think about sin itself, doesn't matter what sin it is totally irrational for us to take part in something that we know brings about death. The biggest lie that sin sells us is that there are no consequences for our decisions. The reason is because we often sin with no earthly consequences whatsoever. Think about it this way. In the Garden of Eden, Genesis 3 and verse 4, the serpent looks at Eve and says, you will not surely die. The lie there is that the fruit may be like Cinderella or Snow White. Snow White actually. Man, I got to get back up on my Disney movies. Snow White eats the apple and falls asleep. Maybe it's the idea that, no, that fruit's not really going to kill you. But when she ate of it, she didn't physically die. It just, her soul began to be in jeopardy because, you see, she defied God, and with it, bringing sin into the world, she also brought death. So you see, sin really doesn't bring about death and consequence immediately, but many times they aren't immediate, so we don't think about them. Let's look at it this way. Paul seems to talk about it in Romans chapter 7. We pick up in verse 15. He starts out saying, I don't understand my own actions. He goes on to say this. He says, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing that I hate. Now, if I do what I do not want, I agree with the law that it is good. So now it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells in me. For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is in my flesh. For I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing. Now, if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I who do it, but sin who dwells in me. When you first read this passage, you almost get the idea, first of all, you get a little tongue-tied, but you almost get the idea that Paul is saying, it ain't me. I'm not the one that did it. I don't know what you're talking about. For example, you ever had a child in your house, and I'm not going to confirm or deny this, but ever had a child in your house that you got on to them for doing something, and they looked you right in the eye and said, I didn't do it. You sat there and watched them do it, and they said, I didn't do it. Now, that's not what Paul is saying here. It makes me think about when I was in college, I worked in an after-school program. And it was one of those beautiful spring days. We picked the kids up from school. We brought them to the after-school program. We were giving them a snack. They were getting ready to go outside. And I'm standing out on this back porch, and about 15 or 20 feet away from me, I see this little boy, probably first or second grade, and he is so happy that he's got his smiley face fruit snacks. I know some of y'all know what that is. So he's so happy, and he's lining them up by color and just enjoying being out. And he's so excited. And I hear the door open behind me, and out walks that kid. Y'all know the one I'm talking about. Especially if you're a teacher, you know the one I'm talking about. You know that the minute he walks in the room, that internal clock starts, and you wonder how long it's going to be before you say his name. So this kid walks out. He walks around behind this little kid, and I mean, he's in the zone. He's just playing with his fruit snacks. He sizes him up, and I mean, just punches him in the back of the head. I'm just, what was that? And so I ran over there, and the kid, he was okay. He went back to his fruit snacks. But the kid, he just meandered out, punched him, meandered right along like nothing happened. And I'm watching this going, what in the world? So I go get him, and I bring him in. We sit down in the office. I was like, dude, why did you punch him? Punch who? What? The kid out at the picnic table. Is he just fruit? And I called him by name. He's like, I didn't punch him. What? So after that went on for a little while, Mom got there, and we sat down and talked about it, and then I immediately figured out what the problem was. So that didn't take long. But it's kind of like that kid looking at me saying, I didn't do it. That's not what Paul's doing. Paul is not saying, no, I'm not sinning. No, I'm not doing this. No, it's not the old idea that the devil made me do it. The idea is that Paul is not playing a deflection game. Here, nor is he talking about he didn't do anything wrong. What we're doing is he's saying that the foolishness that Paul is talking about is that we were not made to be ruled over by sin. That's not who we are. God created us in His image. We were created for so much more, and that was not it. Sin is not supposed to be able to rule over us and to reign over us. When we change, we have the desire and the will to do what is right, and often we choose not to do it. Let me show you what I'm talking about. If you'll turn over and look at 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 7. 2 Timothy 1 and verse 7, it says this, for God gave us not a spirit not of fear, but of power and of love and of self-control. You see, we were not created with fear. We learned fear. We were not created with fear, but we were given things that could help us. Power and love and self-control. We were not supposed to be fearful people with a purpose. Those three things God gave us so that we could be able to overcome our adversary. We're not supposed to be people that are afraid of our adversary or afraid of what people might say or do to us. He has given us the power to do what is right. He has given us the love to want to do what is right. And He has given us the self-control to realize that we're not some wild animal who can't control our actions. So when we deal with sin and we know what its consequences are, it doesn't make sense, it's foolish, and it's irrational. We need to remember that we are made with a purpose. Ephesians 2:10 says that we were made for good works. Matthew 5:14 and 15. We were made to be a light, a city that is set on a hill which cannot be hidden. Isaiah 43 and verse 7 says we were created for His glory, to glorify Him. We were not created for sin to reign over us. You see, the insanity of sin really comes in when we confess our sins to God and want to change within our hearts and minds, but we are not willing to make changes in our life to stay free from sin. Maybe let me put it this way. How many of you have ever struggled with a sin? You bring it and you lay it at the feet of God and you ask for God's forgiveness. And then it's not very long until you're doing the same thing. That's kind of what Paul's talking about. You see, when we lay this at the feet of God, we understand that God is going to take it from us. But we have got to make decisions to change some things in our life so that we can move forward. Overcoming sin has to be about, let me say it again, it has to be about changing our lives as much as it is changing our hearts. Because without that, we cannot change. Remember the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result? Well, I can tell you from many years of ministering, and not only that, my personal experiences as well, you cannot overcome your sin unless you remove things that lead to that sin. For some, it might be a job. For some, it might be a certain group of friends, that one you've grown up with, that one that you have this tight relationship with, that one that you have an investment of time with. You might have to get away from them. For some, it might be our technology. I always love in the movie Fireproof, if you've ever seen it. In that movie, the man there is struggling with his addiction to pornography. And that day, he finally had enough. I'm removing this from my life. He takes his computer out into the driveway, takes a baseball bat, and just crushes it. He realized that thing was causing problems in his life. You see, for us to overcome sin, we've got to be willing to make some changes. The list goes on, and for each person, in situation, it's different. Each person's changes are different. We'll look at it this way. Here's an exercise that I like to do with people that I'm talking with. An exercise that I like to do. Maybe you have some paper that you can write on. And we're going to say, only for example's sake, that eating Krispy Kreme is a sin. Only for example. Please make sure you hear that. Only for example, we're going to say that eating Krispy Kreme is a sin. We're going to write that right in the middle. And now what you'll do is you'll draw a circle around that circle. And in that circle, what I'm going to need you to do is I'm going to need you to think about things that lead you to that sin. And you're going to specifically write them down. When we draw another circle around the smaller circle, it looks like this. Houston, there we go. It looks like this. We all know, many of us know where Krispy Kreme is located. I even know the exact easiest route to get there. You know, if you're coming down the parkway and that light is on, the red light is on for the stoplight, you can come up on the parkway and come right back down and you won't have to wait at the stoplight. So I know that. So for me, it might be avoiding Memorial Parkway altogether. Just stay away from it. How about technology? Or how about this? How about your friends? Well, I'm going to have to tell you, there's about 3 people in here today that I'm not going to be able to be friends with anymore. That's Esco Olinger, Rick Eichelberger, and David Pritchard. And let me tell you what David did to me on Friday night. David was a great guy. He helped me with field day at Chestnut Grove all day. And that night, he texted me this picture of 24 donuts opened up and texted it to me. Then he sends me a picture of him stacking 2 donuts and cramming them in his mouth. And I'm thinking, You're not helping me. Of course, my next thought is, where's my dozen? Maybe even technology. I don't know how many of you knew, but did you know that there's an app? I hope the app sales don't spike right after I say this. But there's an app that will tell you when the hot light is on. Not only that, it'll tell you where the closest one to you is when that light's on. But you see, things like this, that circle around that middle circle, those are the things I have to avoid. I have to make decisions to avoid those things, because those things lead to the thing that I'm trying to avoid. We'll draw one more circle around the outside. In this outer circle, what you're going to do now is be positive. What are some things that can help me? See, when you do an exercise like this, you'll begin to understand that there are some factors that you can control. Remember that self-control I just referred to? There's a lot of things that you control. So around this outer one, they might include some different things. You might include exercise in there. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but you'll be amazed at how little of a donut you want to eat after you've just run and you just feel terrible. So maybe exercise is an option. Maybe, for me, I would include Jake Bailey's name in there. And the reason I would is because he doesn't like Krispy Kreme. How he's my child, I don't know. But he doesn't like Krispy Kreme. So he doesn't like to eat that, so that's who I'm going to be with. Or, I could even quote Scripture. When Esco sends me a picture of those hot donuts he's eating, my reply to him is going to be, "Get behind me, Satan." You know, that's what Jesus said when he was tempted in the wilderness. You know, and then prayer. Now, I know this, let me remind you, this is a false idea that eating Krispy Kreme is wrong. But if you sit down and analyze the things that you're struggling with, why you're struggling with them, this exercise can help you to overcome that sin. This outer circle is where you need to stay. And you're going to have to make tough decisions when it comes to dealing with sin in your life, because we know sin can destroy us and sin brings about death. And that's what we're trying to avoid. We can look at it this way. 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. It says, "Since therefore Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves with the same way of thinking, for whoever has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, so as to live for the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for human passions, but for the will of God. For the time that is past suffices for doing what the Gentiles want to do, living in sensuality, passions, drunkenness, orgies, drinking parties, and lawless idolatry. With respect to this, they are surprised when you do not join them in the same flood of debauchery, and they malign you. But they will give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead." I was teaching this class on this passage one time to a bunch of 7th and 8th graders. Let that sink in for just a minute. A bunch of 7th and 8th graders, and I had to go through and explain what some of these words were. I looked around the room, and there was a 3rd grader sitting there, and I went, "I'm going to need you to go to the 3rd grade class before I really get into this." And so we got him going. But when you begin to look at this passage, you can sum it up of Peter saying, look, it's time. It is time, because Jesus Christ came to live and to die for you. The time is past for doing those things. If you have committed your life to God, you have a different goal. You have a different purpose. You have a different focus. And we look through here and we understand, look at what he says in verse 4. It says, they malign you. It means they will talk evil of you. And you see, it's time for us to stop worrying so much about what people might say and worry about what God will say. You see, Christ not only came to earth to die on the cross for our salvation's sake, He came to show us how to live. Peter's telling us it's time to put up or shut up. He's telling us it's time to step up and realize I've put away those things, leave them alone. Some of those people you used to run with and do certain things with are going to be surprised when you don't want to do the same thing. And that's when God says that in 2 Timothy 1:7 that He did not give us the spirit of fear, but He gave us the things to be able to overcome. We're more afraid of people, what they might say, when we choose not to do the things that are wrong. Talk with the teenagers about that all the time. They are afraid, oftentimes, of standing for what's right. They're afraid of stepping out and not doing what maybe they've done before, or the friends are doing. He says, the time has passed. What are you waiting for? What's the problem? Makes the point that you wanted to give these things up, then why do you stay close to them? That's what he's saying here. When you become a Christian, your desires are different. Your choices are different. And your goal is different. Notice I said that in a singular sense. We have one goal, and that's heaven. For us to be able to do that, we've got to make changes in our life. It's not about sufficing your every want and desire. When you become a Christian, it's about then living to the glory of God. Can you say this morning that you are living for the glory of God or the glory of self? And Peter goes on and says that these people will be surprised when you don't join them. I find it so interesting when he says that, because I realize, even in my own behavior and my own actions growing up, I realized some of my failures was because I refused to cut ties with people who would bring me down, with people who would not help me focus on what is right. And that right there is our problem. We often try to look like the rest of the world, and we cannot do that. We were never meant to live camouflage Christianity. We were not meant to look like everybody else. Throughout the Scriptures, we're called aliens. We are called the chosen, the called out, because we're not supposed to belong. Go on and look at it with me, if you will. John 17, verses 14 through 16. Jesus said this. He said, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of this world, just as I am not of the world. I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but you keep them from the evil one. They are not of this world, just as I am not of this world. So here's some questions to ponder. The world hated Christ. Why should I care if they hate me for the same reason? Christ did not belong here, so why should I try so hard to fit in? And the third question to think about is, if Christ was not part of the world, then why am I trying so hard to be a part of it? Why am I trying to fit in? Let me ask you this morning. What life means the most to you? Are you living for the fame and the fortune of this world and this life? Or are you living for the peace and eternal blessings that heaven and the next life has to offer? To me, it kind of goes back to what Joshua says in Joshua 24:15. When he says, choose you this day who you will serve. And that's what it comes down to. And in my choices, I've got to choose to get rid of some things in my life. You see, the choice is yours today and every day, who you will serve and where you will spend your eternity. Sin cannot be a part of it, and is it up to you? It is up to you to make the right decisions no matter how hard they might be. Christ has done the most difficult part, taking the beatings, the scourgings, and going to the cross and shedding His blood for us. I believe it's up to you and I to make the choice today. And my question is, what will you choose as we stand and as we sing?
Break my heart.